The Horse Race is brought to you by Benchmark Strategies, Boston's leading public affairs and public relations consulting firm. To learn more, connect with Benchmark on LinkedIn at Benchmark Strategies or visit benchmark-strategies.com. Welcome back to The Horse Race, your weekly look at politics, policy, and elections in Massachusetts. I'm Steve Koczela, president of the MassINC polling group, here as always with the great Jennifer Smith, reporter for CommonWealth Beacon, and it is Thursday, January 15th. Today, we're looking at polling on Greenland, ICE, and Minneapolis. Then, back here in Massachusetts, a story on gateway cities. Are they what we all thought they were? Hey, Jen.
Hey. How are things? Happy Wednesday.
Things are good. I think we're pretending it's Thursday, though. We do that for our listeners.
No. Our listeners are smart enough to know that time is a flat circle, has no meaning, and what is Wednesday is Thursday or also Tuesday and sometimes Friday.
I figure they think that we record when they want to listen and that we somehow do it live. But we do have, as we always do, planned content. This here podcast is very well thought out, very well scripted. But as we were getting ready, assembling everything, there was a story that came out in the Washington Post about a reporter who had her home searched by federal authorities. And rather than say anything else, I'm just going to get out of the way here and let you go because I know this story has hit very close to home with you.
Yeah, so kind of the background on this in general, in case folks are not aware, it is really, really, really rare for federal agents to basically try to find out if reporters are in possession of classified materials. And the reason that it is relevant for me to note that, in fact, if you were hypothetically thinking about how often it is for federal investigators to go into a reporter's house and look for classified materials, it's rare. It was also really, really hard to do for a very long time. And the reason that we bring this up is because FBI agents basically conducted a search at the home of a Washington Post reporter looking for what they said was an investigation into possible sharing of government secrets. So the Post has reported this, the Times has reported on this, and basically the reporter in question has been covering Trump administration's efforts to fire federal workers. And so that's all very connected to kind of the history of what exactly was DOJ? Is DOJ? What has DOJ been doing? How has the Trump administration been approaching these kind of mass firings? And so she's been reporting on that. And the FBI has said that they are looking into how this information might have been leaked, if there was any classified documentation. And they went into her house to do this search. And I think the last thing that I want to note here, because I'm, trying to keep my head on straight because this is sort of a baffling turn of events, is basically this is not just a reversal from kind of conceptual past behavior, but there was a Biden era policy that literally limited the FBI's ability to search or subpoena a reporter's data to look for leaks. Like there was an official policy under the prior administration saying we really should not be doing this. And the Trump administration ended that policy last year during the first year of Trump 2.0 and are very quickly now behaving in accordance with being unbound by those rules. So it's pretty disturbing for reporters who often are given information that they did not personally go hack into a system for, or they did not solicit. But the idea that the FBI could now be searching your home and going through notes is a very troubling turn of events.
It does seem also worth noting that a lot of what the Trump administration has brought against people in many circumstances has been pretextual. You think even right now, the war over the Fed chair, but you look back at Jim Comey, you look at the various people who have crossed the Trump administration in any way and have had things like, their mortgage applications pulled out and other things like that. So it feels relevant to me that when the Trump administration doesn't like somebody or when they're against somebody, there's all kinds of different justifications that seem to get invented to, put that person in the crosshairs of some federal agency or another.
I would note that that's that seems to kind of be correct looking at the record here. The rationale that the administration has given here is that this is part of essentially a sweeping anti-leak crackdown. The Trump administration has, like many administrations, really not liked the idea of leaking. And the issue is that the Justice Department in a statement said that it's not going to tolerate unauthorized disclosures that undermine President Trump's policies, victimize government agencies, and cause harm to the American people. So there's a very specific kind of this is for protection of Donald Trump and his administration. Like they're saying that. That's not really, a hypothesis here. But the reason that I bring up that this is leak oriented is this is one of the areas in which there's often kind of bipartisan ire at reporters over leaks or other sorts of actions that involve information that you don't want to be public becoming public. And one of the things that all reporters kind of note to each other is, as part of policy, like, leaks are good, actually, in our view. There is a reason that they are often central to reporting on otherwise opaque processes that are designed to be opaque by nature. And of course, it gets complicated when you get into national security situations. But I just think if anyone wants to have a nice week rereading the Pentagon Papers case, it's an optimal one.
There are listeners of this here podcast who will do that, who will take that suggestion, and I'm confident.
Do it. Do it. It's a great time. Great time and timely.
All right. Well, we have a lot to talk about today. So we have polling, we have gateway cities. Where should we start?
I think, Steve, as a gentle kindness for you, the person who actually seems to know what day of the week we're recording on, why don't we start with polling?
All right.
Politics these days is like the downhill part of a roller coaster pretty much all the time. Your stomach is in the air, you're screaming at the top of your lungs, there's no wind-up, no suspense, no preparation, just panic. Crazy stories come in bunches, if not dozens. It can be hard to keep up, but some of those stories do in fact make it all the way from us, the very, finicky, wonky-oriented observers, all the way to the public. And a few of them are underway right now. And good thing for all of us and all of you, we have Steve to walk us through this. Steve, there is so much polling right now and so many stories. Where the heck do we start?
I think today we start in Minneapolis, and we're going to do some of my favorite geographical bouncing here and there, but we don't have enough time to fly all the way to Venezuela this time just because there's so many geographic locations that we have to visit. So let's start in Minneapolis.
Yeah, let's do that. And so the reason that we're talking about Minneapolis, of course, is to put it in very brief terms. There have been very large protests over ICE actions around immigration enforcement. This is kind of the ramped up enforcement effort that the Trump administration is engaged in. But over the last week, it has gotten very, very heightened and very, very heated because there was an altercation that is very much in dispute between the Trump administration's description of what occurred and, say, reviewing the footage by the Times and other news organizations, where, long story short, an ICE officer shot and killed a woman who was in a car at the protest, and the administration says that she was trying to ram the agent. The footage does not back that up, essentially. It is not clear whether she is trying to leave the situation or back up or reverse or get out of there. But regardless, an ICE agent shot and killed a woman, a U.S. citizen, in her vehicle at a protest. So with that wind up in place, how do people feel about the actions of ICE in Minneapolis?
Right. And I think we could summarize it by saying both in general and in specifics, there's very broad disapproval of the way that ICE is acting. So starting broadly, and then we'll get to that particular incident, the Quinnipiac actually did a survey where they just asked in general whether they think that, whether Americans support or oppose the way that ICE is enforcing immigration laws, and found that 40% say that they approve, 57% say that they disapprove. Starting broad, there's that. YouGov did a related poll where just about a third said that they think ICE is making Americans more safe. So looking out at everything that ICE is doing, much less than half feel like this is making America more safe.
And we should note, of course, in here that there are very substantial partisan splits. One thing that stood out to me in both of the YouGov polls is that independents are more inclined to say that ICE is making the country less safe. So it's not just that it's Republicans and Democrats. If you're looking at kind of those essential middle voters here, they are not in alignment, obviously, to the extremity of either party, but they are much less inclined to be supportive of ICE than Republicans. So given that, narrowing down into the shooting of the Minneapolis woman, how do they feel about that?
Right. Drawing from the same YouGov poll, just 30% thought that the shooting was justified. So basically, YouGov asked the question, based on what you know, was it justified or not? And 30% said yes. There's a huge party split on this, though Democrats are more united in saying that it was not justified. 83% of Democrats say it was not, than Republicans are on the other side, where 64% say that it was. So there is a huge party gap, but Democrats, I think, are a bit more united. Quinnipiac actually asked a related question and found fairly similar results, with more saying that it was not justified. Interestingly, of their survey respondents, 82% said that they have seen a video of the shooting. So, we were talking about how there's just this cascade of news that you can't possibly keep up with. This is one that definitely has broken through. Like, people are focused on what's happening in Minneapolis and on this specifically.
That kind of reminds me actually of last year's story about the arrest and attempted deportation of the Columbia student, where just an awful lot of people were in fact seeing information coming out about that. So at least when it comes to immigration enforcement actions, there seems to be a good amount of public awareness, not just on kind of the broader feeling, but also a lot of these specific instances. And so once again, we've talked a lot about the idea of social media kind of as a polarizing force, but it does also seem to be still true that people are being inundated with visuals and individual incidents. And maybe we can talk about polling at some point about what happens when it gets harder and harder to tell what is a real video versus what is an AI video. But I'm going to pivot away from that soapbox for just a second, because when we have talked about these events in the past around law enforcement actions and violence, one of the things that's come up in police context has been, well, the cry of abolish ICE, defund the police, that sort of thing. There is polling on that kind of phrasing. You may object to the way that they're behaving, but what do you want to do with the institution specifically? Where are people at now as opposed to where they were a few years ago?
Yes, and that is a very interesting point, because, you might remember it was kind of 2018, 2017-ish when the abolish ICE thing first came up. It was during the first Trump administration. And back then, it really wasn't that popular, even among Democrats. We did a poll of the Massachusetts 7th District when Ayanna Pressley and Michael Capuano were running against one another. And, these are Democratic primary voters in one of the most liberal districts, one of the most liberal states in the entire country. And support for abolishing ICE was like in the 20s. It was not a popular position. And even to the point where lots of Democrats, when they would get accused of it, when they would say, well, all Democrats just want to abolish ICE, the retort was like, no, they don't. Like, this is something that was like invented, and like a few people, agitators out there on the internet, have made a hashtag. Now, fast forward to today, and the YouGov poll finds 77% of self-identified Democrats support the idea of abolishing ICE. So this has been a massive shift in public opinion among Democrats. YouGov has a little bit of history. They've asked the question a couple times. In 2018, the number was at 46% in their survey, 2019, 55. Now it's 77, and I think a big part of that shift is just the way that the way that ICE has been conceptualized now is so different than ICE was even in 2018, when the idea was sort of, well, yeah, I think we need some kind of immigration enforcement. Like, that stands to reason. But what's happening now is just so different from I think what people would have thought about back then.
Right. Well, that's all the time we have kind of on the immediate domestic front for now. We're taking a trip over to Greenland, off to Greenland. So in case you have had your attention possibly divided among the 1.5 million other things going on, the Trump administration is talking pretty openly about how much it would like to have control over Greenland. And so that's been sort of a combination of making veiled and not necessarily veiled threats. I believe the most recent one was we could do this the easy way or the hard way, about getting to Greenland, or also kind of putting that in very direct terms, which is either maybe buying their citizens off to try and join the United States, or trying to take it by force, which would involve invading a sovereign territory affiliated with one of our NATO allies. So that's interesting. With all of that in mind, Steve, are Americans enthusiastic about the idea of acquiring Greenland?
No. The short answer is they are not in favor of that. I think that the best metaphor is this idea is selling like Trump steaks or like Trump wine or like any of the other Trump products, which is to say, not very well. Not very many people are buying it. So looking at another YouGov poll, they asked, do you support or oppose the U.S. using military force to take control of Greenland? 8% support, 68% oppose, including more than 2-to-1 opposition even among Republicans. So this is not an idea that has any domestic audience whatsoever. There's also, of course, the questions about legality. There's the questions about the devastating consequences on our allies, on any remnants of moral authority we might someday regain, but just in the raw question of, do Americans want to do this? The answer is no, they do not want to do this.
And I think that maybe takes us to where we often find ourselves, which is when you're dealing with this fire hose of news stories, it can sometimes be a little bit hard to piece apart just how much space they take up in the average American voter's head here. So they might be aware of the ICE immigration enforcement actions. They may be aware of what's going on in Greenland. They may be aware that we are removing leaders of other countries, but is it their primary concern? So there is polling on this from the YouGov poll about what the most important issue is. I'm going to guess it's the economy, sort of.
Yes, it is still inflation, prices, jobs, the economy. Those are still the issues that people are most concerned about. And approval ratings of Donald Trump on these issues are much lower than they have been. One of the bargains that people made with themselves in voting for Trump was that, he's going to be good on the economy, and thought that he had been good on the economy last time, didn't feel great about the economy that Joe Biden had created, or that was present when Joe Biden was president, we'll say. But, his approval rating on that is much lower, and that is still the number one issue on people's minds.
All right, Steve. Well, thank you for updating us, aka me, on Americans' completely overloaded information processing systems. I don't remember what it's like to not have an overloaded information processing system. I'm sure it occurred when I was maybe 9 years old or something at this point. But for now, I think that's all we have. We'll be right back.
The Gateway City designation has been around for almost 2 decades now, and being a gateway city comes with financial perks. So, are the right cities in? Are the right ones out? Who even decides what a gateway city is? There's a great story in CommonWealth Beacon this week that looks at these rules. The story was written by our colleague Hallie Claflin, who is actually out on vacation this week. So, Jenn will be playing the role of Hallie for us today, walking us through this important story. Jenn, you, of course, were adjacent to this story, and you've all covered gateway cities many times, so the topic is not new to you. And we only have you today. We don't have Hallie, so you get the questions, and you get to channel Hallie as best you can.
I was, thinking about how to appear most convincingly Midwest in this conversation, which is usually your bag. And I think it'll probably just be channeling my strongest opinions about cheese. So I'm ready to go with that in my mind. That's my energy.
All right, I'm ready. So I'd venture to say that most, if not all, the people who listen to this podcast have at least heard the term gateway city. They may not know exactly what it means, but they know what it is and that it has to do with Massachusetts. So what do people think a gateway city is?
So what people think a gateway city is, and there are reasons that they would think this, is that these are cities that are kind of definitionally regional economic drivers. These hubs that might be former industrial sites that sort of anchor these regional economies. So you might think of something like New Bedford. You might think of something like Salem or Fall River. So these city, or Worcester, for instance. So these are cities that have kind of central economic roles in their region that basically aren't Boston. That's what people understand them to be.
But there's also another definition, which the story gets into, which is there actually is a legal definition also.
That's right. So, as the state kind of in the early 2010s started thinking about recognizing this kind of unique system here, and this was initially a definition pushed by MassINC, so we need to acknowledge that in big, bold letters. So, back in the day, the idea was, well, this is kind of what we mean by these cities. But legislators were essentially, for good reasons, you'd imagine, saying, well, we can't just do this based on vibes. We have to figure out a certain set of metrics to define what it means to be a gateway city. So here's what they landed on. In statute, a gateway city has a population greater than 35,000, but less than 250,000. It has a median household income below the statewide average and a rate of educational attainment, meaning a bachelor's degree or higher, that is below the state average. Those three things are what make a gateway city legally speaking. No mention of industrial or regional economy, anything like that.
So what I take from that then is basically these are big cities, but not the biggest city. Like Boston clearly isn't a gateway city, but they're not necessarily enjoying the economic benefits of being in Massachusetts as much as other places are, in that they're below average on both educational attainment and also household income. Is that like a fair sort of common man definition of what a gateway city is?
Yeah, that is sort of what it is if you're going just based on the statute. And the reason that I come back to that is what Hallie was realizing as she started kind of looking into this is that a lot of people are sort of using that struggling regional economic centers definition, which initially was just 11 mid-sized cities outside of Greater Boston. There was a very discrete list that MassINC put together. But when the state decided to actually put some terms on this, we got 24 gateway cities, and it was updated in 2013 to include 2 more. So there are 26 of them, and then they never touched the list again. So there is the layman's definition, and then there is the actual definition.
And that becomes a problem that city leaders in various places are noticing, because there are real benefits to being a gateway city. Like, this isn't just a label.
Right.
There are things that come with the term.
That's right. If you look at where gateway cities actually come up in legislation, it's under economic development incentives programs and encouraging basically more spending in these cities. It's not like a housing program specifically, even though plenty of these are oriented at boosting housing or boosting new development. But it's an economic program. There's a bunch of tax credits, millions of dollars in development funds for programs that are specifically aimed at these cities.
Okay, so it's something people want. There was a definition. Under that definition, there were 26 cities, but as the story goes into, these aren't actually the 26 cities that meet these criteria at this point.
Right. So I am channeling Hallie here. We were all sort of in the newsroom as this was sort of burbling up. We'd all heard these rumors of it for a while, but there have been murmurings around Beacon Hill that some cities probably shouldn't be on that list and others should. And when I say should or shouldn't, I mean that literally they don't match those definitions that are on the actual statutory list. But there's been no movement. And notably here, 3 current gateway cities, that's Salem, Methuen, and Quincy, are all doing a little bit too well in either household income or educational level to meet that bar. And meanwhile, Weymouth and Marlborough now meet all 3 criteria to be gateway cities under the statute, but they aren't on that list. So there was just kind of these weird rumblings about, well, if you think that a city that you represent should be on this list, if you are a mayor or if you are a lawmaker, who do you call? Who do you check with? Why is there no process for reevaluating these?
And clearly, because it's state government and there's an office for everything, there's definitely an office where somebody is keeping track of these things. They've got a spreadsheet, they've got a model where you can call and say, hey, look, check again, we should be on this list, right, Jen? There's a person that's in charge of this.
You're taunting me and I'm mad about it. This was a wild rabbit hole for us all to sort of be next to and poking on, because it really literally seems like it should be straightforward. There is a set of rules. You get money if you meet the standard. Somebody has to check to make sure the right cities are getting this, right? But even though the economic development law that lists gateway cities says that it's supposed to be, quote, under the oversight of the Secretary of Economic Development, when Hallie started asking around, nobody actually knew how that process process was supposed to work or who was supposed to be managing the designation. We have a Gateway Cities caucus, but no part of their role involves like going through a checklist every few years and, comparing it with the American Community Survey or census numbers or anything like that. So how something gets on or off the list has sort of just been an open question since the Deval-Patrick administration.
Interesting. Okay, so there is not a person or an office at this point that controls that sort of thing. But I do know from reading the story, which was great, and everybody should go read it, CommonWealthBeacon.org, free plug. I do know from reading it that you actually asked some of the key lawmakers, some of the lawmakers that are involved in the cities that should be in or out. So what was the general response when Hallie went and asked these questions?
So when she was starting to do this, of course, one of the first things that she did was say, well, we have a Gateway Cities Legislative Caucus, so let's check in with them. So the interesting thing is that the kind of push to reevaluate cities and towns is coming from representatives who think that theirs should qualify under these kind of new rules. So there is some kind of jostling and reportedly more discussion than there's ever been before about like, can we figure out what comes on and off this list? But Antonio Cabral, who's a New Bedford Democrat who co-chairs the Gateway Cities Legislative Caucus, told Hallie that even if a community meets these criteria and wants to be considered a gateway city, it needs to have that history of deindustrialization and has to be this regional center of economic activity, even though, as we've talked about, that is listed nowhere in the actual law. So there is this kind of blur between the kind of original intent of what this economic development program or this set of economic development programs was supposed to be supporting and what actually got put into statute. So there's not actually tremendous appetite from the leaders of the Gateway Cities Caucus to move these cities on or off the list, in part because you kind of have a discrete set of funding. This is a really valuable asset. And so if you're just adding a bunch of additional cities to it, you necessarily are kind of divvying that pie up more and more and more. But then the flip side of it is, well, if you're looking at kind of this historical definition, then why would anything ever come off that list? Wouldn't they always be a historical regional hub of economic development? And so that kind of clash has made it very complicated to figure out, well, what is it that makes a gateway city? Is it literally just that you are slightly less educated than the rest of the state, but also large?
Yeah, that is the question. And as you note, like the accompanying question is, what's the policy for? What's the policy trying to do? So certainly there will be, I'm sure, discussion on that. But speaking of that, what is the next step? Like, where does this question go from here?
Well, to do anything here, the legislature would need to act, essentially, because nobody is really sure what the process is for getting a gateway city on or off the list. Presumptively, that means that lawmakers would have to kind of create that mechanism. They created the rule, they threw the program administration under economic development, but they didn't, for instance, say, qualification as a gateway city is dependent on XYZ. So with that in mind, they would need to do something. And the kind of broader, most meta question here, which kind of tickled a lot of us in the newsroom, is if you actually look at the 3 cities that no longer count, there might be political reasons why that would sort of become complicated. Do you, if the lieutenant governor is the former mayor of Salem and the Speaker of the House represents Quincy, do you take Salem and Quincy off of a gateway cities list? That is tricky politics. So all of that in mind, the legislative math is going to be messy going forward.
All right, Jenn. Well, thanks for walking us through this. Thank you for being Hallie for the last 15 minutes or so. Very interesting story.
Doing my best. I told her I would try to make her proud.
We'll be right back.
I'm Zainab Asma-Doyle, Research Director at the MassINC Polling Group. The MassINC Polling Group serves the region's leading foundations, political groups, government entities, and businesses. Our surveys and focus groups bring high-quality data to the toughest questions facing society today. Learn more at massincpolling.com.
And that brings us to our final segment, which this week is brought to you by our Naming Cute Puppies on the Internet department here at the Global Media Empire headquarters of the Horse Race. And we have brought in our special correspondent who deals with nothing but stories that cover those topics. And that is Chris Lisinski of CommonWealth Beacon. Chris, welcome back.
Steve, I'm happy to be here for perhaps the most important news material I've ever discussed on this show.
Yes, and that's because we do bring you in whenever a local police department has a cute puppy to name, which in this case there is one. So what's the story?
Somerville Police Department has a newest recruit. It's a 5-month-old yellow Labrador retriever mix, and if you were to go to the fantastic gathering place that is the Somerville subreddit, you'd see a bunch of comments about the community voting on what to name this dog. Of course, the actual survey has 4 choices: Davis, Fluff, Magoon, and Mystic, but we should give special credit here to the Redditor who suggests that the name of the Somerville Police Department's new dog should be Thin Bluey Line.
This is so important, Chris. I'm so glad you came back on for this, because just the peek behind the curtain is we have all been thinking about this for the past week. When you mentioned this as we were recording last week, we were like, we got to have Chris come back on and explain, what do you mean Thin Bluey Line? Why?
Yeah, that phrase has just been bouncing around my head every day.
And we've all spent a lot of time Googling it, trying to figure out where you got that phrase from, and did finally find our way to the Somerville subreddit. There were actually a couple other fun ones. There was somebody who said, oh, you should just name it Copaganda. But cute dog, though, as this commenter says.
Look, Chris, the one follow-up there is like, are you going to be back next week with animal content naming?
I suppose let's just put a memo out to our listeners. Get in touch, Lisinski at MassINC.org if you've got any inside intel or a scoop to share about politically adjacent animals and their names.
That's right, because last week we talked all about the Somerville Bike Path Cat Mayor with Chris also, so I feel like it's becoming a trend.
I am still, of course, up in arms, so to speak, about the prospect of not allowing a snake to be the cat mayor of a bike path.
Jenn, it's the cat mayor. It can't be a snake.
We're not doing this again.
Okay. I do want the Thin Bluey Line to meet the cat whose campaign slogan was just crime, because I feel like that's too good of like a bit of content to not have happen. So for anybody adjacent to the Somerville Police Department who wants to make that happen, we will cover it exclusively right here on the Horse Race. For now, fortunately for all of you who take this podcast seriously, that is all the time we have for today. I'm Steve Koczela, signing off with Jennifer Smith, and for these last few moments, Chris Lisinski. Our production and theme music is done by Charlie Koczela. You can write to us at thehorseracepodcast@gmail.com. Don't forget to give The Horse Race a review wherever you're hearing us now. Subscribe to CommonWealth Beacon's daily download, and reach out to us here at the MassINC Polling Group if you need polls or focus groups done. But for now, thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.